Now that you understand the essentials of how photometrics are supposed to work and the importance of modeling to scale, we can start building a scene with photometric lighting. We're going to start with a free light because that's the simplest. A free light is one that is good for table lamps, floor lamps, downlights, fluorescent tubes, or any kind of lighting fixture that does not have a specific directionality to it. If you do need to precisely aim a light, then you'll want to use a target light instead. But this one is going to be an omnidirectional light that's shining in all directions. So I'm going to go to the Create panel, and under Lights, we've got Photometric Lights, and here's Free Light. Now, as soon as I start trying to create that free light, I get a dialog popping up that says, "You're creating a photometric light. It's recommended that you use the MR photographic exposure control. Would you like to change this now?" Well, if it says MR photographic exposure control, that's good. And we should say yes, because exposure control always has to be on when we're working with photometrics. We'll look at exposure control in great detail later. So I would say yes at this point. Now, if you create a light and this dialog says to you, it's recommended that you use logarithmic or some other type of exposure control, then you don't want that because those are all for the standard default scanline renderer. So in Mental Ray, we always want the so-called MR photographic exposure control. So that's fine. We're going to say yes to this, and that's going to turn it on. So now we're allowed to create our free light. And I'm going to go over to my plan here, and I'm going to just zoom in a little bit with the mouse wheel and click once to create the light, and then right-click to finish creating lights. Then I'll go over to front or side view and increase the elevation, move it up to the right height. There we go. So we've got our lamp there, got our photometric free light. So now as soon as I do that, you'll see we're starting to get some illumination in the shaded views. So already things are working pretty much. Now, to help you a little bit with visualizations, you can kind of get a sense of what things are supposed to look like. For each of the viewports, you can go into the controls for that viewport. And in Max 2010, they've got a new way of handling this. There's 3 different menus per viewport. And the one on the right is your shading mode. So if you left-click on that, then you can go in and choose these different shading modes like wireframe and whatnot. And additionally, you have sections here for lighting and shadows. So you can choose to, for example, illuminate with scene lights, and that's what we're seeing here. If we're having trouble seeing what we're doing and it's blasting out in the viewport or whatnot, we can choose illuminate with default lights. And now we're back to just seeing with default lighting. This is just an over-the-shoulder light that's behind the current viewport's camera. So that's sometimes helpful when you can't see what you're doing because your lights are too intense. Also, in this menu, we have the ability to enable hardware shading, and this is supposed to show you a better representation of what your lighting is going to look like. So it is hardware dependent. It depends upon whether your computer's graphics adapter is able to support these fancy features. Additionally, under lighting and shadows, we have the ability to enable exposure control in the viewport. So that's also good because that gives us a sense of whether we've got the right exposure, whether our virtual camera's iris is open to the right amount for the lighting that we have. So these are the options that you have. You can view with scene lights or with default lights. You can enable hardware shading. If hardware shading is on, you can enable exposure control. Now, your mileage is going to vary quite a lot with this depending upon what features your hardware supports. But it's great that in Max 2010 they've added these features because previously with photometrics it was almost impossible to tell what you're going to get without doing a full rendering. So that's how you'll create a free light. And next we're going to look at adjusting its basic parameters with photometric templates, which are built right into the light itself.